Okay, so now we're going to show you how to change text color in the code itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this text color function on the label. So we have our LBL label and then it's going to be dot text color. So we've been working with text and then text alignment. Now we're going to change a color in the code. This is going to be very useful because we might want to change it upon some event, and it just kind of helps make it a little flashy, a little more interesting. We're also going to show you how to change it in the attributes inspector, but bear in mind once it's in the attributes inspector but not in the code, it cannot change as the app runs. Okay, so the next property we'll be looking at changing will be the text color. Much like with any of the other attributes, we can actually go right into the attributes inspector and change a color if we'd like. So the way we do that is just by simply selecting color and choosing any one of these or other, and then we kind of get the scale. There's a few different options that we can choose from to determine which color we want. However, that is not what we're going to use. We can do that and that will change it immediately right here. So I wonder why hello isn't showing up there. That's interesting. Oh, I see, because we changed the color to white. Okay. Yeah, so that's how you can change a color in the attributes itself, and it will stick that way forever until it's changed in the text. However, there may be times when we want to change a color in the code itself, so maybe an event will happen where we'll want to change the label color or something. So the way we do that is going to become apparent in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and create another function. This one's going to be called change color. In fact, change text color. And yes, I know I spelled color wrong there. Okay, there we go. So now we're good. And again, I'm going to call it in the onCreate. So change text color. Okay, good stuff. So now let's put all our functions to change the text color in this function itself. So the way we want to do that is going to be LBL label, and we're going to go dot text color this time. Okay, so not text alignment, text color. Okay, and if we select text color, then notice that it's a UI color. Okay, so we're going to need to do the same thing that we had with NS text alignment. We can either set this equal to some kind of a number, which is going to be a hex code for a particular color, or we can say NS, what was an NS color? Let's see, so color, UI color, there we go. UI color, and we can call the dot, and then we get a large list of different colors and functions. So we don't want all of those. The ones we'll be looking at will be these ones. So black, blue, brown, clear, dark gray, cyan, all of these different colors. There's a bunch of different colors. So these basically have built-in RGB values and alpha values. So the alpha is how kind of see-through an object is, whereas these RGB values determine what the color is. If we want, we can actually customize these RGB colors by calling the function in here. So initialize return a color object using specified opacity and grayscale values. So we can do stuff like that. We can specifically give it values, or we can just choose kind of one of these. Okay, so let's say we want our text to now be, let's have it green. And that's fine to do. So we're now changing the color to green. Let's see what it looks like when it's run. And okay, so again, these warnings are just that these variables aren't used. That's fine. And let's see what it looks like now. Okay, there we go. So this is the green that it comes up with. And so that's kind of cool. We can change the text color like that, or we can change it again directly in the change it directly in the attributes. So I'm just going to close this up and stop running it. So again, this is very useful for if we want some kind of an event that's going to change a color, and that's going to happen a lot. Like if we want to make our apps interesting, then it's nice to be able to kind of change these values as the apps run. And that's really the point of this tutorial, is kind of getting you used to labels. So it's easy enough to just click on the label and go through and change all of these. But again, once they're changed in here and not in the code, they can't change. Okay, so they're going to be stuck like that for the rest of the app. Okay, so that's how to change a color. I just chose this green, but there are many other options. So if we want, we can go dot, there's blue, brown, cyan, dark gray. There's all of these functions here. There's white, alpha component, you can kind of set the alpha component, and so on and so forth. Okay, so go ahead and try out some of these colors. Try to go ahead and initialize some kind of, I'm just going to set this back to green. I urge you to, go ahead and try out some different colors. Try out the modifying those RGB values, so that way you can kind of customize exactly what kind of colors you want. Okay, so that's how to change the colors. This next part will just be looking at some final things that we can do with UI labels. Okay, so with this part we showed you how to change a text color in the code itself and also in the attributes inspector. So in the attributes inspector, it was simply a matter of choosing from a drop-down menu. We selected other from the drop-down menu, and then it kind of gave us a few different ways to choose a color. In the code, all we did is we called lbl label.textColor, and then we assigned a value, said equal to, and then we had to say UI color dot something. Okay, and UI color gave us a lot of different kind of like built-in colors that weren't so customizable, but also gave us the option to customize our own color by adjusting the RGB values and the alpha value. So in this way you can get a really nice custom color, and you can kind of change the colors in the code as the app runs. This just makes it a little more flashy and a little more interesting. Okay, so now we're going to show you how to deal with scaling issues within the code. So we're going to show you first how to change the text size to make sure it fits in the label, because if we have too much text for the label to contain, a lot of it just gets cut off. Okay, and that's the last thing we want to have happen. This way, by implementing this function, it will kind of scale down the text to make sure that it all fits. Okay, and we're also going to show you how to change the number of lines that a label can contain. So same thing, if we allow the label to contain many lines, then it's obviously a lot easier to fit more text into the label. Okay, so this just makes sure that everything can fit within the label and that no text gets cut off. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to talk about will have to do with the scaling factor. So these are going to be two attributes that we'll modify. And again, we can modify them right in the attributes inspector here. So we can go ahead and modify them here, or we can modify them in the code. Like with everything, the good thing about modifying them in the code is that we can change it once the app is running, so we can kind of change them based on certain behaviors. And these two attributes are going to be the number of lines, and the other attribute is going to be whether or not the label text can scale. Okay, so this means that if we have too much text for our label to handle, if the text is too big, then it will scale it down, so it will decrease the font to make sure that it can all fit. Okay, so that's a factor that will only happen if it's true, and the number of lines represents how many lines of text we can have. Okay, so if we have only one line, then this means that the text will only display on one line, and if it's too big, it will just get cut off. If there's more than one line, then that allows the text to go onto a new line, and so we can have multiple lines within this one label. Okay, and if it still doesn't fit, then that's where the scaling factor comes into play. And the scaling factor just allows, again, the text to decrease in font size until it all fits. I mean, it will decrease down to a minimum font size. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to create another function, and this one's going to be called change scaling, and just going to set that up there, and I'm going to call it in here, so change scaling. Okay, so yeah, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do LBL label dot adjust font size to width, and again this is a Boolean value indicating whether the font size should be reduced in order to fit the title string into the label's bounding rectangle. So we're going to select that and say it's true. And I know that was that was kind of a lengthy sentence there, but basically it just kind of ensures that we can shrink down the font size to fit the width. I mean, pretty much exactly what the function is called. Okay, and we're just going to set it to true, which means that this can happen, because by default this is false, which means that if the text is too big, it just kind of gets cut off. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to change the number of lines, so LBL label dot number of lines, and I'm just going to change this to 2 instead of 1. Okay, so this is definitely a good attribute to be able to change within the text itself or within the code itself. This first one we could just kind of change in the attributes inspector there, but this number of lines is a good one to change because we might want to be able to increase the number of lines depending on what kind of text we're feeding in. So although this is fine right now, what if later on in the code we suddenly decide to feed a bunch more text into the label and we don't have enough lines? Well, that's why we have this number of lines operator, so we can just adjust it and give it the number of lines that it needs. Okay, so that's what these two operators are doing. This one is just, again, making sure it scales down the font size to make sure that everything fits, if it's true, down to a certain minimum. So it won't keep going and keep going. It will stop past a certain point, and then if it's, can't go any smaller than that, it will start to get cut off. This number of lines just dictates how many lines that label can contain. That doesn't mean that it has to contain that many lines. So like if we set this to 5, that doesn't mean that this label has to contain 5 lines, because right now it only really has 1 sentence. And that's barely 1 line. But that just means that it can have a maximum of that many lines. So if we have 2 lines and there's enough code for 3 lines, then some of it's going to get cut off. Okay, so that's what those two are doing, and that's going to be the last of the attributes that I'll introduce to you. So that doesn't mean to say that there aren't any more. There are going to be many, many more attributes that you can check out. So the way we're going to check them all out is going to be LBL label, if we call it again, and then dot, and then it gives you this huge list again. So this contains so many attributes that you can modify. I can't go through them all. I just kind of gave you the ones that I found that I use the most often. Okay, so you might find that you'll use other stuff more often, and if you do, that's great. Just kind of test it out, play around with it a little bit. Now that you kind of have this software and you've seen the basics of what to do with it, it's up to you to go out and just kind of try new things, give it your all, experiment, see what's most efficient and what really works for you. Okay, so in this final part we just showed you how to deal with some common scaling issues. So we first called this attribute that was going to adjust the font size to fit the width, and it just kind of adjusts the text scaling. It decreases the font size as the text gets too big, so that it ensures that it fits within the label. So if the text is too big for it all to fit in the label, it just kind of decreases the font size until it's small enough that it will all fit. We also change the number of lines to be more than 1, so that the text in the label can spill out into more than 1 line. Okay, so in our case we only had kind of 1 small sentence, and it was fine to fit all on 1 line, but in most labels you'll probably have more than 1 line needed. Okay, so either the text gets really small or it spills out into more than 1 line, and that's fine. So this kind of allows you to set a maximum number of lines. It doesn't have to fit in all of the lines, but this and the kind of adjusting the font size to fit the width function just kind of ensures that all of the text stays within the label and that you don't get anything cut off.